And we're back with more News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Petrona Show. Well, what really happened on January the 6th? Big question, because we were told by the mainstream media, by the left, by the Democrat Party, and a good chunk of the Republican Party that this was an attempted coup. This was an attempted insurrection. This was a case where literally tens of thousands of crazed MAGA supporters, Trump supporters, converged on the Capitol building, took it over, led by that dreaded shaman, the QAnon shaman with the great getup. He's, by the way, doing 4 years in prison for that little stunt. But what really happened? Well, thousands of hours of video from that event have since been released, and they're in the possession of Fox News, soon to be in the possession of others. Tucker Carlson went on the air, and he aired some of it, which, frankly, led some of the leftists in the media to go crazy because it showed the opposite in some cases, in many cases, that this was kind of a peaceful walk around the Capitol building led by police. Yeah, police were actually showing the shaman around. Hey, have a look at this. Enjoy yourself. Relax. Say a prayer on behalf of the police, which of course he did. And so this really has helped sow a lot of doubt in the minds of many. I mean, let's not forget, 5 people did die in that incident, most of them Trump supporters. And so a lot of people were wondering, well, what really took place? Well, now we're getting kind of some background video as well from James O'Keefe, formerly of Project Veritas. We don't know what his status is really right now. He was a founder of Project Veritas, but he was booted out. But he's back with an incredibly interesting and incriminating video suggesting that there was a lot more to this, and that the Democrats knew at the time that it was a mostly peaceful protest. We heard that from Nancy Pelosi herself. Anyway, we've invited Daniel Boardman to have a look at this and to give us his take. Daniel, of course, is with the National Telegraph. Welcome once again, Daniel.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is quite an interesting story that's developed over the last year. And I mean, I remember this happened on a Wednesday because that's when I would tape my shows. So it happened at noon on a Wednesday. And I remember seeing it and some of the footage and saying, okay, this isn't good. You can't be going into the Capitol and running around. Okay, this is not good. I remember doing a thing, right-wing talking head saying, yeah, guys, don't run around in the Capitol. Like, this is not productive. You look like idiots. But then I remember the next day, Thursday, Friday, watching, the news, CBC or CNN, and they turned this into 9/11 2.0, only worse. And that just wasn't the case. So you had this thing where anyone could look at it and say, okay, January 6th wasn't nothing. It's not like nothing happened. There were some people who were a bit rowdy going into the U.S. Capitol. Like, you can't have that happen. But it was not an insurrection. The American democracy was never in threat. There was no terrorist plot to overthrow the whatever. And what we're seeing now, and what we've seen kind of over the last year, is it looks like there was the violence was instigated by the federal government in a large part. I mean, you have the Ray Epps stuff, the guy who is on video multiple times yelling, we're going to storm the Capitol, we're going to storm the Capitol, hey, everyone, tomorrow we're going to storm the Capitol, going around yelling, hey, we're going to storm the Capitol, guys, make sure, push the barriers, fight the cops, we're going to the Capitol, we're going in. He's never been charged, he testified, and likely, he was a Fed. So there's this weird thing going on. Now, I also think that just because, someone instigated someone instigates a mob, and there's a bit of a mob mentality, it doesn't absolve people of responsibility for their actions. But the narrative of the dangerous Trump supporter and the dangerous MAGA stuff, a lot of this was fanned on by the establishment. And it's coming clearer and clearer that they wanted an incident on January 6th. They wanted some sort of incident by the Trump supporters to sort of delegitimize the movement, to claim that it's, a quasi-extremist, terrorist, insurrectionist, some way to, I guess, censor, ban, or do something. I mean, I don't know. It's always impossible to know the exact motivations, but it seems like there was some sort of top-down understanding that they wanted something to happen. And you see the media is kind of in on it because they will ignore all the exculpatory evidence where the QAnon shaman is. There's a video that his lawyers claims to not have had access to, where he's at the Capitol doors reading out Trump's tweets saying, be peaceful.
Yes.
We don't want this. Everyone be peaceful. And him being shown around where it's him and like 8 different police officers walking through.
And we're going to have a look at that, Daniel, but I want you to comment on this video. Too shocking to believe. James O'Keefe posting this exposes government conspiracy to frame citizens at January 6th protest. This is what Project Veritas didn't want you to do. Okay, so this is speaking to the ongoing rift between James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, which basically gave him the boot after the Pfizer expose. But let's listen to this, bearing in mind that there's some strong language here. AOC, what a potty mouth. Calling out Nancy Pelosi. Let's listen.
It's about January 6th.
Okay, what are we looking at right there? Okay, who's the guy with the paper? That's O'Keefe, is it not?
O'Keefe is the one with the paper.
All right, and he's talking to a reporter, a journalist at the New York Times.
6th, quote, it was like me and 2 other colleagues who were there on January 6th outside, and we were just having fun. I know I'm supposed to be traumatized, but like all...
See, this is Matthew Rosenberg. So he's being read his either tweets or emails talking about this J6 thing as a massive nothing burger.
These colleagues who are in the Capitol building were like, oh my God, it was so scary. I'm like, F off. What do you want?
That's Matthew Rosenberg of the New York Times asking me what I want. Only one thing, Matt, the truth.
All right. Talk about that. What are we seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a New York Times journalist, and, you know, one of the people who said this was the end of democracy, and Matthew Rosenberg is essentially confirming what we said, that he never really felt in danger, that, I mean, he's basically saying from the inside, we overblew the story, which is what I think any reasonable person can say. And again, the problem is this isn't absolutely nothing. It's not like nothing happened on January 6th. You know, the Capitol was breached and people went inside, and at some points it was more like, again, Ashley Babbitt was shot by Capitol Police. I got to imagine there was some sort of ruckus in there, but we were also seeing videos in parts of the Capitol where it's quite quiet and orderly. So I think what Rosenberg is saying here is, you know, I never really felt like my life was in danger, that this was like a insurrectionist rabid riot. I think he's basically saying that, you know what, if you were a journalist just covering this, you were quite safe. No one was imminently in danger.
Absolutely. Let's listen to some more of this.
It's a disturbing video that shows Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden discussing what to do and deciding to frame the protesters.
These people have crossed the line by threatening our democracy. I've given a shoot-to-kill order for any breach of the Speaker's lobby. Every one of these maggots must be prosecuted. Yes, I agree. No more protests in our capital.
Okay, so there she is. Shoot-to-kill order. Is that what happened to Ashley Babbitt, who appears to have just been murdered in cold blood? She was unarmed. Anyway,
by threatening our democracy. I've given a shoot-to-kill order for any breach of the Speaker's lobby. Every one of these maggots must be prosecuted. Yes.
I mean, this is the same lady who seems to have gone awfully lax when it came to security around the building, and the fact that a lot of these protesters were just welcomed into the building by security.
Yes, I agree. No more protests in our capital.
The video paints a troubling picture of the political power brokers attempting to spin the narrative to protect their own interests. This is not just about the protesters, but about the lengths to which those in power will go to protect their own interests. We will now show you this video and let you decide for yourself what really happened on that fateful day.
Listen, sweetheart, let the men handle
Are
it.
you even listening to me?
Why don't you let me finish?
Congressional staffers were almost killed. I thought I was going to die.
This is an adult discussion.
The public doesn't fear us anymore, and you better do something. Oh,
What am I supposed to do?
do your fucking job, Nancy.
Alexandria, let's both be patient and
No,
respectful
no.
of each other's ideas.
Let's take a step back and look at the big picture.
Joe, I
Mitch,
don't
could you
even
please
have
shut the
anything
door?
to say to you. If we don't make sure those who perpetrated this mayhem are brought to justice, we are all dead.
This was a mostly peaceful protest.
Whoa! This was a mostly peaceful protest. That's from Nancy Pelosi. That's after she gave her shoot to kill order, Daniel. Now she's saying, what are we doing here? I mean, they're out there, they're raising a ruckus, but mostly peaceful. Does that startle you at all?
Yeah, I mean, but this can be interpreted in multiple ways. The most charitable to the, let's say, protesters is she's saying it was mostly peaceful inside the Capitol. Then the other way of interpreting this is she's saying the protests in general, which is the whole, not everyone. Remember, there's like 1 million people in Washington on January 6th because of the Stop the Steal stuff. And, you had, you could say Proud Boys, Alex Jones, all across the right-wing spectrum there. And a lot of them gave speeches, and a lot of them didn't go into the Capitol, just wanted to peacefully yell at Mike Pence and then go home. So she could be saying that fraction was mostly peaceful. We're just talking about people going in. So we're not exactly sure who AOC is talking about. Is she talking about like the 1 million people who came to Washington and treating them all as insurrectionists, except and not just the few thousand that breached the Capitol? Or is she saying, are we only talking about those who breached the Capitol? And Nancy Pelosi is saying that's mostly peaceful. So it's not the absolute smoking gun we see, but it does show that Nancy Pelosi, at least behind the scenes, and Joe Biden are halfway reasonable, where AOC is not. And I think what we're learning, though, is it seems to be true on both ends from our perspective that the breaching of the Capitol was, again, not an insurrection. There probably were some people there who were a bit dangerous in the crowd of a few thousand. So you can't say, oh, nothing happened, absolutely nothing. But this is way overblown. AOC's life was never really in danger. And you're right. I do think your assessment that they are trying to spin this in a way that benefits their political narrative, I think we can see that now.
What did you think of AOC in that?
I mean, I think AOC in that video is kind of who we parody her to be. It's the parody of AOC and the real life AOC don't seem to be, that different, where you have someone who's pretty immature, strident, believes in the supremacy of her political ideology, sort of above the well-being of the American people, doesn't have the ability to reach across party lines. This great sympathetic person doesn't seem to have empathy. And it shows that, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are sort of her parents. And she is the recalcitrant, she's just a toddler, sort of a political toddler in a way. But, I guess the problem with, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden is this is all done behind the scenes. And
Joe sounds really lame there at all. He just pipes in, and I like the way she wraps him across the head, saying, I don't even care what you have to say. This is the president of the United States.
I guess this is a good example why you shouldn't have kids in your 80s. You don't have to deal with a rowdy toddler.
I guess so. But at the end of the day, you still had QAnon, a shaman, go to prison for 4 years. A lot of those people still are waiting for their day in court. It's absolutely insane what took place there.
Yeah, the over prosecution of the people involved is a human rights issue. And it looks like QAnon shaman. From the video we've seen, he should have got 16 days of community service or something, and that would be like the max here. But 4 years in prison is insane. And the other thing I brought up earlier is these exculpatory videos. His lawyers are claiming they didn't have access to them. So either you have like really, really bad lawyers or lawyers who are in on it and on the take and are lying now, or you have a system that framed these people and decided to throw judicial process aside for the political narrative. And both are concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't know how much longer these guys are going to be in prison. It's absolutely astonishing. But what about James O'Keefe coming back from the dead? Some people thought he was finished, but clearly this guy has a major bone in his bonnet, or a bee in his bonnet, about having been treated the way he has been by Project Veritas, and he's determined to continue doing the good work that he's been doing, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, good for him. So he's claiming this is the great story he had that Project Veritas didn't want to publish. And, good for him for publishing it. And, I'll not take anyone's side yet. Like maybe Project Veritas thought it wasn't perfectly vetted and had a bit of holes in it and wanted to wait on it. And that was it. Or maybe Project Veritas was too scared of the backlash from it. And James O'Keefe is the more heroic journalist. I think time will tell on this one. But yeah, I mean, I think I was quite upset when Project Veritas was removed from Twitter and YouTube and all the other things a couple of years ago, because you do desperately need this type of journalism because the independent journalists and the journalism Project Veritas is one of the major bulwarks against massive government corruption. So big kudos to him for putting this out there.
All right, let's watch a little bit more of the video here. This is some of the video that was released by Tucker Carlson.
Who led the
Let's
violent,
watch.
dangerous conspiracy theorist dressed in outlandish costume, who led the violent insurrection to overthrow American democracy. For these crimes, Chansley was sentenced to nearly 4 years in prison, far more time than many violent criminals now receive. What did Jacob Chansley do to receive this punishment? To this day, there is dispute over how Chansley got into the Capitol building. But according to our review of the
Guess we lost it there. I'm going to bring it back in a minute because Tucker took a tremendous amount of heat. How much did you hear? Daniel Boardman, by the way, joining us on Saga 960 on the Mark Petrona Show. How much did you hear about the ongoing war between Tucker, the Carlson Show, and Fox News, the Murdochs, who were clearly under a lot of pressure by the Democrats and the left and the other media in terms of what that video would maybe have an impact on in terms. I know this is rather awkward, but why were they so afraid that this video was being released? And this was a McCarthy, leader of the House, who gave this material to Fox.
Yeah, I mean, I heard this where, the Murdoch Empire is not happy with Tucker going down this January 6th thing. And listen, this is the problem with, government, corporations, media all getting in bed together is we're never going to know what exactly happened inside the Fox News boardrooms unless, James O'Keefe pops up with a tape of it all. But it is not so outlandish to think that the American government would have some sort of deal with Rupert Murdoch saying, okay, here's some things that we're going to say are off limits, like January 6 exculpatory tapes. And in exchange, you get something, or we do something, or the Murdoch Empire is big enough that you don't know where his back was scratched. But the January 6th stuff is sort of foundational shaking news, where you have, this massive government conspiracy, or this at least high level top down government conspiracy to frame citizens for political purposes, and that overrides, the judicial rights of the average American citizen. So it is a major. This is where it is a major scandal, the sort of concocted scandal, and you don't know if Rupert Murdoch and the Murdoch Empire has received some sort of potential kickback in some other sector to sweep this under the rug. And Tucker, I'm sure there wasn't a directive sent out to Fox News on January 7th, this is the narrative we're going with, but it was just kind of assumed he could do it. And I think Tucker getting his hands on these tapes and going a bit rogue might have upset the system there.
Yeah, let's watch a little bit more of this video. Okay, so this is the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley, who ended up going to prison for 4 years, reading Trump's tweets telling protesters to go home and remain peaceful. All right, it's hard to hear. It's hard to make out what he's saying, but he says go home. He said, let's obey our president. Let's listen again. That's it. So there it is. But the problem for him is, as I understand it, Danielle, his lawyer did not have access to a lot of this video. The very video that would have exonerated Chansley, whatever his name is, Chansley, was not available to the defense. It's a total travesty in terms of how this guy was treated in court. They really wanted to make an example out of him.
Yeah, he got railroaded, and there's no way to put it. He got railroaded by the judicial system and the political system, and the can of worms it opens is way. I think, the government's treatment of January 6th is a greater threat to democracy than what happened on January 6th. And there's another problem that there's going to be two different worlds in America now, or in the West. It's people who believe that January 6th was the greatest threat to democracy, and people who believe that the framing of January 6th and what happened afterwards was a greater threat to democracy. And if there's no way to bridge this gap, we're going to see further political polarization and distrust and people going into camps. And we already know that the social discourse isn't A+ across party lines these days. And this is just going to make things worse.
Yeah. Let's listen to the last bit of this video that was released by James O'Keefe, picking it up with AOC launching into a tirade against Biden and Nancy Pelosi.
Anything to say to you. If we don't make sure those who perpetrated this mayhem are brought to justice, we are all dead.
This was a mostly peaceful.
I mean, remember, this is the same person who thought that the Antifa BLM riots were just fine.
I don't care why they were there. Violence, non-violence, doesn't matter.
Yeah, so her beef is the fact that there were people at the Capitol building who didn't like her, who didn't support.
That's crazy authoritarian statement.
Election. It's not about violence. I don't care whether they're violence or not, whether they're violent or not. She doesn't care about that. We can't allow these people to protest. That's the mindset of the tyrant. That's the mindset of people who oppose and will crush anybody who dares dissent against them.
That's some Saddam Hussein level logic. It doesn't matter if they were violent or non-violent. The very fact that they opposed me is the crime here.
That's Trudeau-esque, isn't it? That's Trudeau-esque.
Yeah.
Let's hear a little bit more.
We can't allow those who showed up to get away with it.
They can't.
We can't allow people who showed up to get away with it. To get away with what? Protesting?
Can't allow protesters to get away with it.
They use anonymous sources. They say people familiar with the matter. And of course, that's not what we do. We show the lips moving. We show the videotape.
There you go. I don't know. The narrative is collapsing around this thing. I'm not sure what the longer term impact will be. What do you think it'll be?
It's impossible to say. I mean, I do think the fact that some of this video came out, I think it's a good thing for the defendants. I do think it will be harder. I do think if there is a top-down conspiracy from the government, which looks like it's a high probability, that they will slow the brakes, knowing that eyes are on them now. So you might see the people who are going to get 5 years get a year, or a lot of this might be the end of the shenanigans, knowing that, hey, if the tapes are going to come out and the public's going to get access to it, a few of the defendants might get off here. But the problem in society in general is there's a certain amount of people who want to believe that the January 6th is the terrorist attack to end all terrorist attacks. And even if there's counter evidence and they won't listen to it. They won't want to listen to it. They won't want to hear you talk about it. I mean, I remember getting yelled at by family members on the Friday night dinner after this, when I was saying, yeah, it's bad, but you're in power now. A lot of people on the political right feel gaslit about the BLM riots, and you're trying to frame this as like a super threat to democracy. Like, I agree it's bad, but can you not just say that your thing is bad too and we can all get along? And I got screamed at for that. And I got banned from talking on family dinner. My uncle tried to ban me from talking at family dinner because of this. And he's the head of a friggin' university. Like
you were the child, the bad kid. Go sit in the corner in the kids' table and then just be quiet, Danny.
Yeah, I was saying this is bad. January 6th was bad. I agree with you. Okay, But you have to admit, you had your own election fraud nonsense with the Russia stuff, and you had the BLM riots, which you were just say both are bad right now. And like, I think I was just saying society needs to heal. So I'll come and say my side's bad, things are bad. Can you come and say your side's bad, things are bad? And then he screamed at me and banned me from talking.
I can't believe you got banned from. How can you be banned from talking? I mean, aren't
like,
you allowed to? How does that work at your place?
I don't know. It was a sort of a bit of a temper tantrum from my uncle on that one. But it was like, yeah, no more political opinions. And like, but I don't start. Listen, despite what the world thinks, I don't start any of the political talks in the family. But like, I let them go, and once they get too ridiculous, then I come in and I say, okay, counterpoint. But yeah, he was not having that. He was like, no, okay, no more of that. Like only like center left talking points. We're gonna go from the center left to the slide to the left, and that's our frame of discussion from now on. All right.
So I guess if you just say the mere act of saying the word Trump could get you booted out of the house.
Well, he lives in the States, so these were like still when Zoom chats were going around the family Zoom, and so he can't. Yeah, he's part of the American family, the American cousins. They moved to America.
Wow. Anyway, I mean, if you factor that into what happened with the convoy, because you remember, I mean, that's the way the left, the media was trying to frame the convoy, was within the context of a J6 style insurrection.
That's actually a very good point. Because I remember
the level of gaslighting amongst these people is just absolutely bizarre.
This is a very good point. I was at the convoy covering on the ground. And so the convoy was 1 year after this. And everyone at the convoy kind of knew that they wanted to frame this as a Jan 6 and was very vigilant on looking out for instigators and anyone who would try and make this into a violent thing or go into the Capitol or storm Parliament. So it was interesting because a lot of the people in the convoy had known that there was some shenanigans done to make January 6th look like a Uber terrorist attack. And they knew that the Canadian government wanted to follow the same pattern. So everyone in the convoy had this in the back of mind and used that to be vigilantly extra peaceful and, kept cleaning up the city and like the people were just shoveling the streets and picking up all the garbage and like the streets and the thing. Ottawa was immaculate during the Freedom Convoy, and in part because they saw the framing of January 6th and they knew the government wanted to do it to them, and they were going to do everything they can to avoid that narrative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they still went on to freeze accounts, of course, justifying it. I mean, under the pretext that this thing was dangerous, these people were trying to overthrow the government. And yet they kept running into the facts, right? I mean, now we see Global going all in on China collusion, doing, a very, very good job with this guy Cooper. But let's not forget what they came out of maybe among the most disgraceful displays of fake news ever with the alleged burning down of an Ottawa building, or attempted.
Yeah.
I mean, and so they were disgraced. A lot of the media was disgraced. And to give them their credit, to give them their due, I think they came out of that thinking, you know what, we've got some serious fence mending to do on the journalism end of the equation here. And so they threw themselves in and they did the best they could to shore up their crappy reputation. CTV has remained crappy as far as I can tell. They have continued to suck. So I guess you have to ask the degree to which they've been infiltrated by hardcore leftists, even more so than the likes of Global, which, as I said, has continued to kick ass on. What do you think of the Chinese coverage, the media so far? I mean, it's hard not to sort of give, a Fife and Chase over at the Globe and Mail, Cooper over at Globe.
Terry Glavin, even Andrew Coyne's kind of got on this one. I mean, there's a handful.
Of course, Bob Mackin, who's done a fantastic job.
Yeah. There are some people, old school journalists, who are doing a fantastic job and doing exactly what they should be doing on this file. And they're keeping the story alive and they're digging deeper. And this thing goes much deeper. I'm actually going to do a video after this on where I think the body of the iceberg is. But yeah, so you have this cadre of old school journalists who are doing great. Then you also have like the Toronto Star, who's like trying to push the liberal narrative. Too bad the liberal narrative insane, or I guess not too bad. Like Trudeau just accused everything of racism, and the Toronto Star's like, I guess this is what we have to say is everything is racist. Okay, this is our defense for moving the Liberal Party. So with the Trudeau being so incompetent on this, they can't. If this was a conservative scandal, every journalist would be mobilized, and it would be constant, and you'd see the backbenchers, and everyone would be coming in and taking pot shots. Here it's just, you're seeing the China scandal is showing you which journalists are uncorrupted, which ones still have the journalistic ethos and say, this is a major scandal. I can see this is a major scandal. This is worse than the Russia stuff. We got to cover this and dig. And all the journalists who follow that ethos are digging and doing it. And you mentioned Cooper and Fife, like a lot of them are doing great work. And then the government still has a few people who can come in and throw in the op-ed or obfuscation piece, because the left, Katie Telford can always get on the phone and get someone from the bleachers to come in at the Globe and Mail, the Star, or whatever, and say, either the criticism is racist, it's overblown, blah 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 blah. Pierre Poilievre is the real problem, or people will focus on the non-scandal of the Christine Anderson thing. So you still have this sort of the liberal hacks doing what they can, and the people who either ignoring it or obfuscating, but the scandal is big enough. And I do think there are enough journalists you've seen within the mainstream who do care about the profession that they are keeping this alive. And that is good to see.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing people like Susan Delacour over at the Toronto Star talk openly about, well, maybe Justin should go. If he can't handle the idea of bringing in an inquiry, he should step down. And I can't help but thinking that these are liberal journalists. These are people who've carried water for this guy for so many years. Now they all of a sudden thinking maybe better step down, because if he is implicated as a person who actually really did collude with the Chinese to have an impact on the election, well, I don't want to go down with his ship. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that they carried water for this guy for so long, as he goes down, they go down too. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, some people might be liberal hacks, but they still have brains. And, what we've seen is, like, at best, this scandal is Trudeau knowing that the Chinese were trying to infiltrate and fell asleep at the wheel, did nothing. So at best, this is negligence. And at worst, this is active treason from the Prime Minister. And we're trying to suss out where on the scale of negligence to treason does this fall. But neither is good. And this is a hostile government, financially and coercively influencing our politics. And you're seeing that Senator Trudeau appointed, what's his face, just going on, and like clearly he works for the CCP. There's no ambiguity about it. He is there to push the narrative of the Communist Chinese Party, and he's appointed by Justin Trudeau. And his loyalties are to the Communist Chinese Party, not to Canadians, not to Chinese Canadians. It's to the party in Beijing.
And I would go further to suggest that the Trudeau's interests lie with those with whom he's in bed, and that is the China CCP, not the Canadian people. I got to wrap things up, though. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate that.
All right, thanks for having me. Anytime.
And that is it for this edition of the Mark Petrona Show. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Thank you. Let's do it again soon, shall we? Maybe tomorrow. So in the meantime, stay safe, be strong. Bye-bye for now.